What up, roomies? When most people think about history, they think about dates, wars, famous names. But history has another side, a darker side. And it's filled with unsolved mysteries, terrifying crimes, haunted legends, forgotten disasters, and stories so unbelievable they sound like horror movies. Today's guest has made her mission to uncover these stories. Brenda is the creator and the host of Horrifying History. Make sure to go check out her channel, where she explores places where she explores the places where history, folklore, science, and the supernatural collide. Instead of simply repeating legends, she digs into the evidence, the history, and the myths behind them, inviting people to think for themselves. Brenda, welcome to In the House, and it's an honor to have you on.
I'm honored to be here.
You know, and it's amazing because you're actually, and this is a big milestone for me. You're actually the first YouTuber I've had on the podcast.
Oh.
So, I'm always trying to push my creators out there and make sure they get their shine. So, it's like I said, it's an honor to have you on.
Oh, thank you again. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So just to or break the ice open, how did you get into the darker side of history and covering those topics?
Well, I was actually born and raised in Western Canada, but I've always been fascinated by the dark side of history and the paranormal as long as I can remember. Now, as a kid, I wanted to be a detective. That was my dream. And then I switched to an archaeologist, but I ended up going into healthcare. and and it was my frontline healthcare and later going into healthcare analytics, where I learned how to do really intense research and that
Yeah,
horror, real life horror, doesn't actually need a ghost. So,
that's true.
how I got started was actually hilarious in my mind. My girlfriend had started a podcast with her brother, and I
Yeah,
listened because I want to be a good friend. And then she
yeah,
asked me to be on and tell something spooky. So I did. And after we stopped recording, her brother is a voice actor. And he said to me, "You got a great voice. It kind of
yeah.
looks like a kindergarten teacher that is telling you the absolute worst stories that you could imagine." I'm like, "Well, thank you. I'll take that."
That's a super compliment.
I believe so.
It's a super compliment. You do have a very beautiful voice, by the way,
Well,
and
thank you.
it tingles the ear and it makes it makes the person you draw the person's attention.
Well, I try my best to teach by scaring people. I find that when it comes to learning, like I took history in high school, you did too,
Yeah, of course.
and my God, my history teacher sucked. Like he was horrible, and I couldn't have cared less about history. And that wasn't until that he mentioned Rasputin. So I started digging into that, and
Yeah.
from there on, I was hooked.
Okay. Was Rasputin the first darker history person that kind of like hooked you into that kind of in that lane?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
because I find that history is better than fiction. And there's so many things that happen in history that people don't know. And it's way better than a movie or way better than, a TV series.
That's facts. And then especially with Rasputin, with everything that he did in his life, especially with the Russian oligarchs and didn't they try to murder him several times?
Yeah. And that's where the supernatural piece came into it. And that's what hooked me, is because he was said Rasputin had all these magical powers and power of persuasion
Yeah,
and all this stuff. And they try to kill him and it doesn't work out. So they try again. I think it took the second time, but that itself made the myth big. It was almost like he was paranormally strong, like indefensible. But eventually he ended up dying.
yeah. And didn't he also curse the Russian family or something? Didn't he curse a family and all the children died in that in that curse or something like that? Or maybe I'm
No,
mixing
but
them up.
it was his presence that was the biggest problem, because
Mm,
he went from a no one, from a nowhere special, to very quickly becoming the queen's right hand man. And he was
yeah.
influencing the politics of what was happening in time. And that's when people are like, "No, it's getting too strong. Got to get rid of him."
Okay, okay. And for those that don't know the story behind Rasputin, can you give us a little keynotes and all that?
I'll give you the Coles notes. So, Rasputin was always interested in religion growing up, And he
Yeah.
had a very good, from very young, ability to, charm people. And a lot of people, or individuals saying, okay, so what? But this guy, he charmed his way to the top. He was allegedly a religious figure who moved into advising the queen because, or the Tsarina, and the reason is her son, the heir to the throne, was sick. He had hemophilia. So whatever magical concoction he did, it actually helped the child. Now, do we know if
Nice.
it helped it or it was just a coincidence? No. But the Tsarina did. She thought it was real and it was
Yeah,
saving her son. And I can understand that, parents who want to do everything and anything for their kid. So,
definitely.
so again, now he's basically in her life a lot and the czars, which then he's now pushing his ideology onto them when it came to politics. And yet, like I said, the other people, the highest echelon, the elite, did not like that because what he was suggesting was something would risk them, their power. So
Yeah.
they decided to off the guy, and they invited him over to a dinner at one's house, and that's when he walked down the basement. They said, "Okay, go for supper," and then they tried to kill him the first time,
Yeah.
and it didn't work. And then they shot him a couple times, beat him up, threw him in a river. Still didn't work, but the last shot got him.
Oh man. And Rasputin was like a big hardy guy, right?
As far as I could see, he was quite tall, a little, not stocky, but not slim either. He was a decent size. That's why they had
Yeah.
to get so many people to go into the room.
No, I
They
got you.
needed help.
No, definitely. And stories like that, and it's crazy how the best horror movies don't compare to history. You know what I mean? Especially
Yeah.
like during the medieval times and like going up to like the 18th and the 17th, 18th, 19th century, because people were wilding and they were acting up. So like, what's like one of your favorite dark history stories that you love talking about, or one that really resonates with you?
Well, there is one, and believe it or not, it's a Canadian story. So I'm thinking you
Yeah,
never heard of the Black Donnellys, correct?
the Black Dahlia.
Nope, Black Donnellys.
No, I have not.
Well, that is tends to be my favorite story, just for the simple fact that um, I'm trying to think of how I could put it. Everybody thinks Canada is nice. We're not nice. We do bad stuff too.
I believe it.
And this story, believe it or not, it became part of a culture, a part of Canadian culture. So much so that there has been books written about it, tons of books written about it, actually.
Yeah.
And also, it was part of songs, all that sort of thing. But again, outside, even Ontario, where I live in Canada,
Mm.
it really isn't that known. So, you want to hear it?
Yeah, definitely.
Now, on my show, I talk a lot about haunted places, and many of
Yeah.
these tales have been exaggerated through the years for many different reasons. Sometimes it helps bring in tourists, other times it will demonize actions that occurred. But the thing is, this actually happened exactly how I'm going to tell it, not exaggerated, and it's a case of extreme hatred that was targeted towards one family, corruption at its highest levels, and it's a story about a community that had a taste for blood.
Ooh,
See, everybody who likes dark
I'm
histories,
already invested.
ooh.
That's it. You got me invested. What's going on, girl? Let's tell me about
Well, the story starts back in Ireland when a young
it. Yeah.
couple fell in love. So James and Joanna Donnelly were married after a short courtship back in Ireland in about 1840. Now they had their first son, named him John Jr., and that young family immigrated to Canada. Now, after
Yeah.
they settled in, they were hoping to establish a homestead for themselves, their son, and their now 7 other children. Now, these
Okay.
kids were born in Canada in the township of Biddulph near London, Ontario. So
Yeah.
it's east, but a little bit, oh, well, Niagara Falls ish in a
Okay.
general. Okay. So, like many other communities in Ontario during the 19th century, this community dealt with constant crime, ranging from robbery and assault and murder. So bringing anyone to justice was not easy, since the majority of the constables at the time were untrained and were also criminals themselves.
True.
So there was not a lot of justice happening. Also, for other reasons, courts at that time weren't handing out decent punishments and what people would think it is. So therefore, there's a lot of tension there. Now, before moving into the area, the Donnellys decided to settle on land that didn't belong to James legally, and they became squatters. The land was actually owned by a company called the Canada Company, and they leased it to James Grace.
Yeah.
Now, James didn't know if the land was owned by anyone, and squatting at the time, um, it was actually common frontier practice and was supported under the courts.
Yeah.
So when 1886 happened, Patrick Farrell bought that land from James Grace. He didn't know anyone was on it. So he immigrated from Ireland, went to take his property and get into his possession, and then he found the Donnellys squatting there. So he took them to court. And Farrell attempted to evict the Donnellys, but the disputants eventually agreed for James Donnelly to keep and reside on 50 acres of land, which was far less than the Donnellys had cleared in the last 10 years that he occupied the land. But even
Yeah.
so, the agreement was made, and Farrell didn't like it too much, so he would vocally attack any of the Donnellys in public whenever he could. So on June 27, 1857, Farrell attacked Donnelly at a public event with a handspike, then died when Donnelly threw another handspike at him, because apparently
Oh,
these things are just laying around. And it was self-defense. But he was a Donnelly, and people didn't really like him. So
yeah.
he had to go into hiding for 2 years, and then he turned himself in. He was sentenced to be hanged in 1859, but his wife Joanna submitted a petition for clemency.
Yeah.
So James had his sentence reduced to 7 years, and he ended up spending that in Kingston Penitentiary in Kingston, Ontario. Now, to give you an idea what Kingston Pen is like, it's kind of like your guys' Alcatraz.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
when he was in prison, the Donnelly stagecoach line was started by James's son, William. It was hugely successful. So William managed the company with his brothers, Michael, John, and Thomas, and the company rivaled the official stagecoach that has been in place since 1838. The competition soon fell under pressure and sold their company to Patrick Flanagan, who became determined to drive the Donnellys out of business. Now, this set the stage for a feud between Donnelly Stagecoach and Flanagan Crawley Stage, where property was smashed, burned, horses were beaten or killed, stables were burnt to the ground. Now, of course, the community put all
Yeah.
this guilt onto the Donnellys, which further worsened their reputation, even though it wasn't just them. So, as
Yeah.
tension started to build in the community, the people just started going to the police and telling them random things just to hopefully get them in jail or something like that. So they were involved with some of it too. So it's kind of murky. So they were
Yeah.
charged with assault, arson, trespassing, verbal assault, attempted murder, theft, robbery, and assaulting a police officer. But every
God.
time they had to go to court, every time they were found not guilty. And this made the community hate them even more. So this is when it starts to get a little bit more complicated. So in
Yeah.
June of 1879, Father John Donnelly created what he called a peace society in the country after preaching to his parish about the activity that he was happening in the community, but his thoughts on who was responsible. Now that is not something you should do in church. Don't you agree?
That's a fact. So you keep that outside of church. If you want to, speak your mind, do it somewhere where nobody's like practicing their religion and worshiping their God. You know what I mean?
Well, it's bias. It's really
True.
bias. So he would say who he thought was responsible for all this, and he came up with an idea. Everybody in the church had to pledge support to the church and to the community by having their homes searched for stolen property. Out of that, a group who called themselves the Vigilantes or the Vigilance Committee formed, and evidence showed that members of both entities were actually the ones responsible for most of the crimes. So he's based the father. He was sitting here and like, I think X, Y, and Z are guilty. Meanwhile, people in his congregation were actually guilty.
Oh,
So the Donnellys didn't want to sign this pledge. And I don't think I would have done it either
no.
because they feared the community is going to use that as an opportunity to hide stolen property on their land and set them up.
Of
right?
course, yeah. It's the
Now,
perfect opportunity.
exactly. Now, to make matters even worse, James Donnelly apparently stood up in a church service to denounce the priest who began to preach hatred against Protestants during his services because many of their family's friends were of that religion.
Yeah.
James also decided to kind of stick it to him a little bit. He donated money for building an Anglican church, which outraged society. So all this turned into a big mess on February 3rd, 1880. This was the date that the Peace Society decided they're taking action against the Donnellys. So the original plan was to visit the Donnelly family home at night, handcuff the male members of the household, then hang them from a tree by the neck until they confessed to all these crimes, with the intent to hurt the Donnellys. How is he going to confess if he's hanging from a tree with a rope?
E- Exactly. You
Like,
can't, and especially if they like kick the stool from under them, their neck is gonna snap.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, when it hits court, that was part of the testimony. Is they're like, oh, we're just going to hurt him a little bit. We're going to put a noose around his neck and hang him for a while. It's fine. So, to help with this really stupid plan, the Peace Society set up surveillance of the property to try to determine who would be home and when, and how to enter the property without being detected. So on February 2nd, James and his son went to town to pick up Johnny O'Connor, who was a relative of theirs. Johnny was going to stay overnight and the following day look after the farm while the family went to court for their latest round of charges. So
Yeah.
about 1 a.m., February 3rd, the Peace Society got together to drink and gain courage before they mounted their attack. When they felt
Mm.
empowered enough with enough booze in them, they walked the Donnelly home and surrounded the perimeter of the property. So the constable of the area, his name was James Carroll. He was part
Yeah.
of that committee. And he then walked into the house because it wasn't locked. He handcuffed Joanna and James' son, Tom, who was asleep. Now, after he got caught or handcuffed, Constable Carroll woke up Tom, telling him that he was under arrest, which woke up Joanne and her niece Bridget, who was visiting from Ireland. This
Yeah.
also woke up John, who asked the constable what the charges were. Tom then asked the constable to read the arrest warrant, and since there was none, the constable gave the signal to the Peace Society to storm the house with clubs. Now,
Oh
at this
God.
point, all the vigilantes started beating John, Joanna, and Tom. Bridget was able to escape them and she ran upstairs to hide. And Johnny, he also hid underneath John Donnelly's bed. Since the men didn't know he was on the property, they didn't go looking for him.
Yeah.
Now, John himself was hit repeatedly in the skull until he died. Joanna, she
Ooh.
was fought really hard against her attackers, but was beaten and killed by Constable Carroll. Tom was able to break free from his attackers and he started trying to run to the front door. But as he was running, he was stabbed multiple times with a pitchfork. When he fell to the ground, several men carried his body into the kitchen where his parents' bodies were, and they removed the handcuffs. After that, they hit Tom in the head several more times just to make sure he was dead. Then the men ran upstairs and found Bridget, and they beat her to death. They carried her body downstairs and put her with the rest of the family. Now, while all this mess is going on, one of the men decapitated the family dog because the dog was barking. I have a problem with that one.
Yeah, yeah. I have a
He
big
never
problem with
touched
that
the
one too.
dog. Well, if
Yeah.
you ever watch John Wick, you don't screw with dogs.
I was just about to say that you don't touch people's dogs, bro.
No, that's the worst. Okay, kill me, but not my dog.
Yeah, he ain't do nothing to nobody. Leave him alone.
No, he's just doing his job of barking because you're not supposed to be there. But
Exactly.
at this point, during this murder spree, the group realized they're missing John Jr. So on the fly, they decided to create another plan to rid the community of the entire Donnelly family. So they lit the house on fire with the bodies inside and went hunting for John Jr. After they left, Johnny climbed out of the burning home and went running for help.
Yeah.
So now it's about 2 a.m. The Peace Society arrived at Whalen's Corners where John lived, and they surrounded the house. Now this time, they decided to attempt to get Will Donnelly, who also lived there, to come out. Instead of storming the home, they started to beat Will's prized horse to lure him out of the house. But the problem was that barn the horse was in was too far away from the house for anyone to hear anything. Spoiler alert, the horse was okay. He survived.
Okay.
So
I was just about to ask, is that where the term "beating a dead horse" comes from?
no, they tried, it didn't work. Now, one of the men started calling for Will while he was carrying a shotgun to the side door of the house. Will woke up hearing somebody calling for him, but it was actually John Jr. who opened the door. He received gunshots to his chest and groin, which caused massive damage to his chest, lung, and collarbone and ribs. He
Yeah.
fell to the ground, and where he was shot 7 more times for punishment for his alleged
Jesus.
actions against the community.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So Will's Donnelly's wife, Nora, heard all this going on, and she tried to actually pull John back for safety, but she couldn't move the body by herself. Will was hiding in the bedroom, and he was able to peep out the window to see who was attacking his home. One of the men he saw was Nora's own brother. Now that's going to be a problem at the anniversary party.
Wow.
Now,
Wow. This got
so
messy fast.
it just got messy. So at this point, the Peace Society decided they're just getting worn out from all this murdering and decided just to sit and survey the perimeter of the property until somebody came out. But 3 hours later, after they started sobering up and seeing nobody leaving, they left the property.
Yeah.
So the very next day, Johnny Will and his wife Nora reported the attack and murders to the local magistrate. Even though reports say that 35 men participated in the murders, it was only Constable Carroll, along with 5 additional men from the Peace Society, who were arrested. Now, at the trial, one of the key witnesses was Johnny O'Connor, because he witnessed the massacre. The vigilantes did everything and anything they could to prevent him from testifying, including burning his parents' house down and threatening his family.
What?
Yep, they did. But Will Donnelly, he also testified, and he too got a lot of retaliation. The defense witnesses just happened to be all the friends and family of the vigilante community and backed all of the alibis of each person who was on trial. Now, due to this, the first trial was a hung jury, with one juror just saying that he would not convict any of them, even if he witnessed the murders himself. That tells you how hated these guys were in the community.
That ass.
When they did the second trial, the judge decided to give instructions to the jury that Johnny's testimony could not be heard because he believed it was unreliable because Johnny's mother attempted to be paid for him testifying. So that's all the biggest person who was involved cut out. Now, as you can guess, the men were declared not guilty, and when this was announced, the community held a party that lasted a full day and night. Now, as I mentioned before, the Black Donnellys are a well-known piece of Canadian folklore, but the inhabitants of that township tried to suppress the subject because many of the residents had ancestors that were directly involved in the murders. But in recent years, businesses started to center on this tragedy. Multiple songs and books were released about the subject. And the NBC released a TV show in 2007 called The Black Donnellys, based on this story. There was also a short film released in 2017. Now, the cool thing is, you can tour this homestead, but many people report that supernatural events takes place on these tours. So it's said that wherever you are in the homestead, items often go missing and are found in unexplainable places. Doors slam by themselves. People hear footsteps from an unseen source, and they report being touched by unseen hands. Individuals also claim to hear voices talking in the middle of the night and hear screams coming from the barn. Question, why do you think the barn?
Because of the horse.
Nope, that was a different barn. It actually is because the original Donnelly home burnt to the ground, but the barn is original to the property.
Okay.
Yeah, so on top of this,
so like the spirits kind of like remained in the barn more than like where the house stood.
Well, the house itself is a newer house, so they're drawn to what was theirs, which was the barn. So the thing about this, on top of this, there has been a lot of sightings of shadow people, ghostly figures throughout this property. The family who bought the property after the deaths called in a local priest to bless the property and give the Donnelly family their last rites. Now, even with this, the ghostly activity still happens today, and it's said to be quite active. Now, in addition to this, the road where those vigilantes walked is supposedly haunted too. It is said that horses will not go down that road on the night of February 3rd. If they do, the horses die afterwards. So it's also said horses won't walk on the old Donnelly property at all. Now, just in case that's not enough ghosts, people apparently see headless the ghost of a horse galloping through the township, and live horses throughout the township just go berserk regularly for no reason. I don't know. I think that's
Wow.
revenge against that whole prized horse thing. That's
Yeah,
my theory.
I think so too, but that's crazy. And like, are there like any families in that town that like get hauntings because they're descendants of like the people who killed the Donnellys?
Not that anyone's reported. It's basically on the property that was the
Okay.
Donnellys and the roads around it.
That's crazy. That's ill. I'm not gonna lie. That's a wild story because you really don't hear about things of that nature. Like, wow, like
It's a
that.
weird one.
That's a super no, but my thing, I could kind of get like why the Donnellys were hated because they squatted on the land. Okay, cool, but to get to the point where you're gonna massacre a whole family,
That's
that's
crazy.
insane. That's
It's
insane.
crazy.
But they also did like create a business that rivaled the mainstream stagecoach business at the time. So I could understand like if their competitors hated them and like the people who bought the land that they were squatting on hated them. I get that.
Hmm.
Excuse me. But everybody else, they were just riding the wave.
Pretty much. Like,
Yeah,
there wasn't. The thing is, okay, let's be honest, the Donnellys weren't totally innocent here,
yeah,
but neither was anyone else. And if you think about it, it's just it was the perfect circumstances to for a situation like this to happen. You didn't have proper law enforcement. The
no,
law was actually the criminals, uh, and and again, they didn't. They thought that the father didn't serve enough time. So back then, the solution was pitchforks and guns.
yo, that is crazy. That's wild.
And what
That's a
bugged
wild
me about
story.
this case when I originally heard it is
Yeah,
when the community held a party that lasted a full day and night. Like,
that
people are dead.
yeah, that's the messed up part. Like you're celebrating the massacring of a whole family,
Right.
and you burn down their house, and like you basically, I want to say, kind of like gave gave them so much embarrassment at their last moments, and especially the niece. The niece had nothing to do with anything. She was just there. So it was like,
Yeah.
why did he even like take like? I understand that was a witness, but you guys definitely crossed that line by miles. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And also, 35 people were involved, but six went to trial and they all got away with it. Like, that tells you how the law was at that time.
Yeah, that's crazy. So when you like dove into this story, you started doing your research. Were you and please take me through like your research property or your research process because do you kind of like look at it with like whatever the answers may be like you're looking at it with a very open perspective or you're trying to get down to like the task bracks of like what the folklore was.
I try to avoid the folklore unless I
Mm.
have researched it to a point to either
Yeah,
prove an origin, if it's
yeah.
real or not. Like,
Okay.
I don't do a lot. I do some conspiracies on the show,
Yeah,
but I always say this is the tale, but this is the truth. This is what evidence shows. And I think that that's one thing society doesn't do a lot of anymore. It's they see something on social media and they're like, it's true. Well, not necessarily. Check your sources.
yeah.
And I drive my mom nuts because she's like, I seen on the news the other day that blah blah blah. And and I'm like, where did you see that? She actually went and called me, this is I think last year, freaking
Yeah.
out because on the news, aka Facebook, because I know I'm being honest, she's on Facebook. She doesn't read the
Yeah.
news. She heard that the city I was in was on a lockdown because there was this big, massive event bad happening downtown. And I'm like, no, nothing's locked down. So I actually, when I look at the news or whatever, I actually go through multiple sources. I
Yeah.
usually go, far right, far left, in the two a little bit closer, and then one right in the middle. And that's how you find out the true story. You don't just look at one source, one newspaper, one magazine, one periodical. You have to look at all of them. So of course I say to my mom, no, we're not in lockdown. And I said, where did you find it? The news. Which news? Facebook? Yeah. I'm like, do you realize that was probably from 12 years ago?
True.
Well, no, it was. They did have a lockdown 12 years ago. And
Okay.
yeah, so I'm like, check your sources, mom, check your sources.
And she's like, Brenda, damn it, I gotta check my sources about
And then she's like, I'll just look on Facebook.
it. So have you ever came across like a story that you're doing research on, and the deeper you dive into it, the crazier it gets, and like you can't seem to find like the origin point or like the rationale behind it?
Um, there is one story that's I'm
Ooh.
pretty sure you've never heard of, and it's just crazy from how it starts all the way until it moves to the end. Now, have you been to a circus?
To where?
A circus?
Yeah, I've been to a circus. Yeah.
Yeah. When the circus comes to town, a lot of people get excited about it, like especially kids, because
Yeah.
circuses are advertised fun for all ages, but it provides entertainment that you wouldn't normally see in your everyday life. But in the case of a circus that went to Toronto in 1855, it was not fun. In fact, it
Mm.
actually led to the changing the city's political structure.
Oh,
So I got to give you a little history lesson to understand it.
I'm,
Okay.
I'm all for
So
it. What's up?
Toronto is the capital city of the province of Ontario here in Canada, and its
Mhm.
population is just under 3 million. And it's the most populous city in Canada and the top four of North America. So it's quite big, even today. It's
Yeah.
very culturally diverse. It's prominent for music and entertainment and museums, or history sites. The public events alone attract about 43 million tourists a year. But it wasn't that way in 1855. It wasn't even close. So what happened is the French established trading posts in the area about 1751. These were
Yeah.
abandoned after the British took over during the Seven Years' War. So after the American Revolutionary War, the land where Toronto sits today was purchased for a new settlement. Then in 1693, Lieutenant Governor John Simcoe decided to move the capital of what he was calling, and they were calling then, Upper Canada, and they decided to move that to that area.
Yeah.
So Simcoe went and called it York, and originally planned for Toronto to be a military outpost, along with another in an area of London, Ontario, which is the same place that the Donnellys were from. Now, he
Mm.
eventually decided in 1796 that there's not going to be a second location. It's just going to be right here, the capital city. There will be no second location. And then development started and Toronto started to take shape, but war struck out again. So now it's 1812, and war was declared between the United States and British in Britain. So York itself was a site of a whole bunch of battles, but 2 years of fighting, and they were on a stalemate. So it was
Yeah.
a time for peace, and Toronto steadily was growing through its population at that time. They renamed it Toronto, which led to the very first municipal election. Now, the winner ended up being William Leon Mackenzie, and he was a liberal, had very liberal ideologies. So he decided a couple of years later to organize a rebellion because he wanted to reform Upper Canada, and his bosses didn't like that idea too much. So Upper Canada forces came in, quickly wiped out the rebels, and William and his followers went to the United States. But Toronto kept on growing. By 1855, the population tripled. It was now one of the biggest cities in Canada, but it wasn't even close to the city today. It was considered to be a really rough frontier town that was filled with saloons and brothels,
Yeah.
and a lot of people took advantage of that. That would be also the SB Howe Star Troop Menagerie and Circus. So on the morning of
Okay.
July 12th, 1855, the circus came to town. The clowns and carnies of the SB Howe Star Troop Menagerie and Circus fit right into Toronto. They loved saloons, brothels, and drinking too. So the circus did a great show for the first day. After their performance ended for the night, I never get through this without laughing, so I apologize. It's about right now I'm
No,
going to
you
start
good.
laughing.
You good.
So after their performance ended that night, a group of clowns decided they wanted to party. So they started carousing and eventually ended up at a business on King and Jarvis Streets that was advertised as a social club operated by a lady named Mary Ann Armstrong. And well, there's a lot of
Yeah.
socialization happening there. It was one of about 100 brothels that lined the streets of the city at that time. And their population was around
Yeah.
45,000 people. That's 100,
Yep.
that's a lot.
Yeah.
So by
That's a whole lot of socialization. Let's
that's
just say that.
lots. So by the time the clowns showed up, they had already hit multiple taverns and saloons. So they were feeling no pain, and they wanted to have a good time with the working ladies. But before the
Of
clowns
course.
arrived, Mary Ann's was already hosting another group of men, and they were from the Hook and Firefighting Company. Now, at the time, city-owned fire departments didn't exist. Instead, there was
Yeah.
several privately run for-profit fire departments in Toronto. So when a fire would break out, every company would rush to that scene and try to cut a deal with whoever owned the building. Whoever made the best
Yeah.
deal would put out the fire. But sometimes that
Yeah.
resulted in no deal being made and the building would just burn down and they didn't care. It
True.
mostly resulted in the rival companies getting into fights or trying to drive the other company away. So 2 weeks before that, the hook and ladder men got into a fight with another company, and it was so bad the police had to break it up. So on July 12th, the hook and ladder guys had another long day of fighting fires and getting into fist fights. And after they hit a couple bars, the firefighters arrived drunk at Marianne's looking for company. So we now have two groups of drunken guys in the same location looking for some fun, and there's a limited number of women. So at this point,
Of
God, this
course.
sounds like a bad joke, but a clown and a firefighter walked into a brothel. What can happen? So as for what happened next, there are a couple
Oh
different
man.
versions. There are a couple versions of this story. Some say that a clown and a fireman got into an argument over
Yeah.
the affections of the young lady and came to blows. In another story, one of the firefighters got mouthy. He purposely knocked off one of the clown's hats. I'm trying really hard not to laugh. And then they started to fight. In another, the clown cut into the servicing line in front of a fireman. But either way, it was the same result. These clowns and firemen started to fight in a massive brawl. So the police had to come break it up. And after they arrived, they found that the clowns beat the living hell out of the firemen. Two of the firefighters were hospitalized. And eventually the crowd did disperse. Only in Toronto. Now, remember I was talking about
Oh,
politics.
yeah.
So back to politics. At this time, the majority of Toronto's population were immigrants from Ireland, and with them, see, I gotta stop right now. Can you just envision like the clown with the big wig and the multicolored hair runs up and punches the
And
honk honk nose with clown shoes, beating the hell out of a firefighter? I can't get that out
I
of my mind.
can. That's why I'm dying. And can you imagine like a firefighter swinging at a clown's face, and all you hear is
And then the clown takes his little flower, squirts him with water in the eye.
yeah. That's hilarious.
But going back to the
Oh,
politics
shit.
of this, the majority of the population were
Yeah.
immigrants from Ireland in Toronto at the time, and with them they brought their own political and religious conflicts. Most of the city's Irish community was Catholic, but the city government was mostly Irish Protestants. So many of the Irish Protestants were part of what was called the Orange Order, which was a political and religious society. They defended the Protestant
Yeah.
faith and kept their connection back to Britain. This influenced politics at many levels and had the goal to keep the Irish Catholics as second-class citizens while they made all the decisions. They were well known for gathering in gangs to physically attack the Irish Catholics in the street. Now, since the Orange Order controlled the police department, they did whatever they wanted without penalty. So, after the firefighters got their butts kicked by some random clowns from out of town, they were bent on getting revenge. So the next night, a gang of firefighters joined up with a mob of men from the Orange Order to hunt down those clowns. They stormed the circus site carrying picks, axes, and clubs. They overturned wagons. They burned down tents. They beat the clowns very badly, and the carnies just ran for their life. And I'm not going to laugh at that one because it's serious, but I'm just envisioning these clowns just running from their lives from these firefighters that they beat up the day before. Now, the police came to the site and they just sat back and watched their Orange Order members beat up clowns. They did nothing. So the mayor himself had to come down to now this is a big riot. And he had to physically step in. He prevented a firefighter from killing a clown with his axe by taking that axe away. So the fighting didn't stop until the mayor called in the local militia, who showed up with their guns and bayonets to break everything up. Now, picture this: injured clowns and circus people were everywhere. But out of the hundreds of people that were involved, 17 were arrested only. So they went on trial a couple weeks later. But interestingly, at trial, all the police got a sudden case of amnesia.
Oh, wow! That's
they forgot everything.
That's such a coincidence.
Yes, they couldn't remember seeing any of their accused Orange Order members at the scene, so they were acquitted. But this is where the change happened.
Okay.
These people of Toronto had enough of this. They were sick of the Orange Order beating up citizens and random clowns. They were sick of cover-ups, and soon after the circus riot, another riot happened between the Protestants and the Catholics. So once again, the police had amnesia when it came to anyone involved from the Orange Order. It was after this that the chief of police at the time freed a suspect who was part of the Orange Order, who was accused of robbing a bank. So he just walked away. So the residents said, okay, we're going to act. And they did through the municipal election. People were determined to vote out the Irish Protestants, despite the order going and threatening and intimidating voters. A mayor who was backed up by the Irish Catholic population was voted into the office. This was the first time since William Leon Mackenzie's rebellion that a person was not handpicked by the Orange Order, and they won the election. So the new mayor immediately set up a city council with like-minded thinkers, and their goal was to remove the corruption from the city government and the police department. So an inquest was launched, and by the end of it, the entire old policing system was scrapped. Within the next 3 years, every Toronto police officer would be fired, along with the police chief. They were all replaced, and the entire force was reorganized into a city-backed, non-political force that was not under the control of the Orange Order. Now, amazingly, it took nearly 100 years before the stranglehold that was on the city by the Orange Order had been broken. Yeah. Who knew that the modern Toronto police force and the fire brigade were developed because a clown and a fireman walked into a brothel? I can never make that face, a straight face. Like, how can you?
I can't even. The thing about it is that sounds like such a bad joke happening. Yes. But yet it's history, and because you would never think that, because it does sound insane, and you would never think that, politics got changed and, orders were put in place because of the fact that there was a fireman versus clown brawl at a brothel. So it was like one group of guys were trying to get lit, another group of guys wearing funny stuff were trying to get lit, and they were all trying to have some fun, and they couldn't just come together and be like, hey, we're all here for the same thing, let's just all chill out, have some fun. But
well, my thing is, they had over 100 brothels. There's no more brothels? Are they all taken up? Like, you can't go anywhere else.
All I know is that Marianne must have been running the best one in town, because
apparently.
But that is crazy. Like
the whole current political and fire department and police department in Toronto today are because it is the way it is because of clowns.
Oh man. Well, Toronto, you could thank a bunch of clowns for where you guys are at now.
Literally and figuratively.
Dead ass. So when you were researching this one, how much were you laughing while you were just doing the research on this one? Because I would have been pissing my pants.
I couldn't help but laugh. It's so ridiculous. And it's actually so ridiculous. I'm like, that can't be right. So when you dig deeper and you find out it's true, it's like, God. I couldn't help but laugh the whole time. It was hilarious. I just envisioned that guy, the wig and the big nose and the paint and clown outfit, and just punching a guy in the face and squirting him with water in the eye of this flower. They all then jumped into a little car and went back to the circus.
Like, and then kicking somebody with the giant shoe.
I can't get through that one without laughing.
Wow, that's crazy. That's wild. Do you have any like paranormal stories that you kind of like, you did the research on it, went through it, you kind of found, some evidence that okay, cool, this really happened, but it just stuck with you because there were still like some unanswered questions that you're like, yo, but how did this happen? And things weren't really connecting, but it was, supernatural or paranormal.
Well, I think it was 2 years ago. I went to Montreal with my husband for the weekend,
Yeah.
and we went to their main museum there. And they have this. It's really kind of cool place to go to, but they have this one place where it's like a ship. And you get to walk through the ship and see different things. But on the wall in the corner, this big cage, and I'm like, huh. What's that? Why is there a cage? Like that's a person-sized cage. It was big. So
Yeah.
when I got there and I looked on the little placard explaining it, like, I got to look into this stuff. Now, also, when I was talking about it with my husband, he's from Quebec, he's French Canadian, and he said he hadn't grown up hearing this story. So it's about the woman that they call La Corriveau. And this has taken like legendary status in Quebec. And she's considered their own boogeyman. But it's not a normal boogeyman tale. This story is completely true. So her name was Marie Joseph Corriveau, and she was born in 1733 in what's now called Quebec City. Back then it was called New France, but the British had taken it over from the French. So since the British government was new to those in the French descent in the area, it actually was pretty tense in the area. Now, not only were they ruled by their former enemy, but the new government that they had created was kind of crappy, really disorganized. But Marie couldn't care about this because she was too busy planning her marriage. She was 16 and got married to a local farmer. Now, he died in 1760, leaving Marie alone to care for their 3 children. But she wasn't single for very long. Less than 2 years after her husband's death, she got married to another farmer in the area, Louis Etienne Douillet. Now, these guys got married, and when they had got married, it was just a talk of the town because Marie's father, Joseph, had several public fights with Louis over the property and business dealings that he was doing. So the town gossip had even more to talk about when Marie unsuccessfully petitioned the crown to get permission to leave her husband because he was being physically abusive to her. Now, even though her request was refused, Marie and Louis's marriage would not last because less than 3 years after they were married, Louis was found dead in the barn on their property. Now, everybody believed it was just a tragic accident in the beginning. They believed that Louis died after a horse kicked him in the head, but soon the gossip started that his death was no accident. These rumors floating around, changed the investigators' focus from an accident to a murder. After hearing this, British soldiers decided to take another look at Louis's head wounds. They determined that it wasn't a horse hoof that did the damage. It was something like a pitchfork. So local gossip said that Marie, her father Joseph, or both of them murdered Louis, and the soldiers charged them with murder just based on that. So Joseph was found guilty of doing the deed. Marie was found guilty of being an accomplice. Both were sentenced to death. This is where Joseph snapped. He totally turned on his daughter. So after he was sentenced to hang for this, he confessed it was Marie that murdered Louis. The only reason he didn't turn her in was because he didn't want her executed for her crime. So when the soldiers confronted Marie with this, she just totally broke. She admitted she murdered her husband using a hatchet. Now, this actually really embarrassed the British. This, in combination with the local gossip that Marie probably killed her husband too, they decided to have a second speedy trial. Marie was sentenced not just to hang, but for her body to be displayed as a warning to others in a metal gibbet. Do you know what a gibbet is?
No, I do not.
Well, after execution back then, a body of a person who was determined to be like a traitor would be put in a human-shaped cage, which would be suspended from a post on the roadside. It would be left there as a message to all that see it. So what I'm saying, in other words, that big cage I seen was Marie's cage.
Oh no.
Yeah. Now, she
Ooh.
died in April of 1763 and she was hung. Her body was gibbeted and left on display for about 5 weeks. Then eventually, her remains and the metal gibbet was taken down and buried in an unmarked grave at a nearby churchyard. But in 1851, the gibbet was unearthed. This happened when the church that developed where she was buried. They decided to enlarge its
Yeah.
graveyard, and they accidentally dug up Marie and her gibbet. So Marie's cage didn't get reburied or buried. It went to on the road actually. Within months, it was exhibited in Montreal, Lévis, which is a town in Quebec, and
Yeah.
Quebec City before it got in the hands of P.T. Barnum. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, I know P.T. Barnum. Yeah.
Yep. So he got this cage and put it on display in his New York museum in August of 1851 with a plaque that said, "From Quebec." That's it. From there, the cage went to the Boston Museum and then the Exis Institute in Salem. During the early 2010s, members of the Lévis Historical Society in Quebec found the cage at the Peabody Essex Museum, and they forgot about it for about 100 years. It was just in their storage. So
Yeah.
Marie's cage was repatriated to Quebec in 2013, and now it sits in the Museum of Civilization in Quebec City, where it's on display right by that kind of cool boat thing.
All right.
But
Cool.
But local legend says that Marie walks the plains of Abraham, which is a historical area in Quebec City's Battlefields Park, where Marie was killed. And this is when the legend of La Corriveau started to grow. In legends
Yeah.
today, Marie killed her first husband as well, even though there's no evidence to support it. Then the stories expanded the number of husbands that she had to 7, and they were all murdered once they discovered Marie was a witch. Now, like every other evil witch of legend, Brie vowed she would return from the grave, and her corpse did not rest in her cage that was allegedly buried at a crossroads. So instead of being gibbeted for 2 months and buried in a graveyard, the stories started to say that Marie was hung in her cage for years before her body disappeared, and the devil took it. So in other stories, Marie's spirit is attached to her cage, but she clings to the back
Yeah.
of lonely travelers. She demands to be carried to the nearby St. Lawrence River to attend a witch's Sabbath on Orleans Island. But for the most part, all these legends about Marie has made her the Quebec version of Boogeyman, with parents across the province saying to their kids, she's going to get you if you're not good. And my husband heard that
So
same story as a kid.
that is, that's actually a really cool story. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna lie. Except for like the whole gibbet thing, a gibbet, right? That's what it's called. That cage.
Gibbet.
Yeah, right. Except for the whole gibbet thing, that's actually a really cool story. I'm not gonna lie to you, like, but that's crazy how like throughout the years, like her story got over exaggerated and went from like you know 2 to 7, and now she's a witch that murdered all her husbands, and she needs to be returned to what was the name of the river again?
St. Lawrence.
The St. Lawrence River on the witch's Sabbath. That is wild. That is
Like
wild.
it went from her murdering one guy and confessing to, yeah, like you said, 7 husbands. And people say that you'll feel the weight on your back. She'll jump on your
Yeah.
back and expect you to carry her to the St. Lawrence. So
Oh,
I've been to the Plains of Abraham many times.
yeah.
I've been to Quebec City, and this is a citadel. So I've been in the citadel. I walked those. I haven't seen anything. Nobody was on my back. The worst thing is once it was raining.
At least she ain't killed nobody's dog. You know what I mean?
There's no dogs involved in this one.
Yo, but Brenda, you by far you are the best, one of the best storytellers I've yet to speak to, and the way you put everything down, you know your facts, you know the legend, and you make it so entertaining. Thank you for being on. So,
Oh, anytime.
so in true in-house fashion, my last and final question will be: do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom, or advice for the roomies?
I would suggest putting down the fiction and picking up a book. If you see something that interests you, look it up, and you can find out about clowns. And uh, witches that cross goes to a river on your back.
Yep.
I just
Yep.
truly love lore and how it goes from one place to the other place. I love seeing how a lot of these what legends develop. Like, for example, vampirism is a
Yeah.
big example. For the most part, back in the day when they started thinking of vampires, there has always been, if you look into it, a outbreak
Yeah.
of TB or rabies. Now, if you think of those diseases and what they do, you can see how the myth of the vampire started. It's
Yeah.
you're coughing up blood, you're very pale, and if it's rabies, it can make a person hypersexual, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So foaming a little bit, and also their gums recede, so you can see the canines a little better. So back
So
then
that's
they
where
didn't
the
do
fangs come in.
autopsies. They didn't do autopsies because it was considered sacrilege against the body, and then the spirit would not go to heaven. So they didn't cut into the body. They just seen these little things. And if you bury somebody in winter, spring comes around,
True.
right? And
Yep.
historically, one thing's true: whenever anything bad happens, people will, if they can't see a rational reason why it's happening, they'll come up with something. And that's where the superstition
True.
comes in, and the lore, and how it spread. Because if you've seen your daughter die and you just buried somebody else in the winter and they dig him up and he's looking pretty good, well, that's a vampire.
True. And they didn't think about refrigeration at that point in time,
Right.
and you know how he and how temperature affects decomposition and all that.
Exactly.
True. True.
And also, they didn't do
Well,
autopsies. They didn't drain the blood like they do today. Because that's why, and of course, this will come out when the body has been, frozen for a while. It's going to come out.
true or not? True or not? Yo, Brenda, yet again, thank you. You're
Oh,
amazing.
thank you
Yo,
for having
roomies,
me.
thank you for being on. Roomies, remember, if you hear a story and it sounds crazy, do some digging because the story behind that might be even wilder. And if you're a clown, make sure not to fight a fireman. You already know.
Don't do it, man. Well, technically,
Peace
firemen
out.
shouldn't be fighting clowns because you're going to get their butts kicked.
Yeah, true. True.
Those
Firemen, y'all
carnies.
got something to prove now.
Yeah.
Those carnies got that farmer strength.
Yep.
Roomies, you already know. Peace out.